paranormal. It surrounds us. It's everywhere. Tonight, you will hear from the people who live and work within these highly active locations, all in the efforts to discover America's most haunted. With your host, ghost hunter and author, Dan Terry.
Good evening, boys and ghouls. I am Dan Terry, your ghost host with the most haunted. And this time we've got a guest that you will not believe. Richard Estep, or Estep, I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly, but he has written some 45 books, and a lot of them on the paranormal, a few of them on serial killers. This guy is an amazing author. I'm just really honored that he came on the show. Among the books is Mothman, Sightings and Investigations of the Iconic Flying Cryptic, Dark Spirits, Monsters, Demons, and Devils, and I hope I get him back to talk more about that kind of stuff. Monsters, Myths, Legends, and Real Encounters. I guess that's cryptids. In Search of Demons. Historic cases and firsthand experiences from experts and skeptics alike. Now, guys, this is the kind of author I wish I could be. And this one I like. It's Haunted Healthcare. Medical professionals and patients share their encounters with the paranormal. And, you know, when I was a cop, we had a few interesting things, but I know the medical field is even more so. I've talked to folks that worked at the old folks' homes, and the stories they had would scare you. It's amazing. And they just shrug it off because it happens so often. But the main topic for tonight is going to be his newest book, which was just published this month, Ghostly Encounters, Terrifyingly True Hauntings. And he's been in England and in the United States, so he knows what he's talking about. Let's bring him up, and maybe we can learn something. Richard, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Dan. It's nice of you to invite me. Thank you.
Oh, it's an honor to have you here. Your books are incredible. Tell me a little bit about what got you started on this, though, because you're all over the place with this.
With this being writing or the paranormal, or?
Well, the paranormal, the writing with the serial killers, anything that's so dark and mysterious.
Yeah, the short version is that I grew up in a haunted house, which my grandparents owned. So I got a fascination for all things that go bump in the night. And when I went to the library, because no paranormal TV back in the 70s, you know?
Yes.
I got absolutely hooked on books by ghost hunters like Peter Underwood, Harry Price, people of that nature. You know, I read various books about UFOs and things of that nature, but ghosts were always my first love. And so when I grew up, I joined a team in the mid-90s that investigated these kind of claims. This was before there seemed to be a research group in every town. We were the only one for, I think, about 50 miles. And so we would investigate claims of ghosts and hauntings and so on and so forth. And then when I came to the US in 1999, I brought that love of the ghostly with me and wrote my first book in 2014, I think it was, In Search of the Paranormal, which was my ghost hunting memoir up to that point. Publisher liked it, bought it, and I have not stopped writing since.
When you are actually still doing the ghost hunting or investigation, whatever you want to call it, yourself, right?
I do actively investigate, yeah. I've got a very busy October ahead of me with quite a few haunted locations to visit. Armchair reading and research is fun, but there's no substitute for actually putting boots on the ground and getting out there and getting it done.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. So your newest book, which come out this month, Ghostly Encounters, Terrifyingly True Haunts. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that one. Where kind of places you hit?
Well, that came out last week, and this is the kind of book where I got to look at some of the cases I've been reading about since I was a boy. So I'd heard, and some of them don't even exist anymore, you know. So this is one of those rare books I've written where it's not a boots on the ground investigation entirely. Although I had visited some of these places like Tombstone, Arizona, and Gettysburg. I'd also wanted to look at some historic cases like Borley Rectory, the most haunted house in England, supposedly,
Sure.
the R101 airship, the crash of Flight 401 in the Everglades, and things of that nature.
You're naming off books. I mean, I read books about Flight 401. I read books about the Borley Rectory when I was learning this stuff in the 70s. So you're naming off the things that I've always been interested in. What did you find with Flight 401? Anything new?
It's a very controversial case. I know that the big advocate for that being a haunting was the author John G. Fuller, and his wife, who worked for Eastern Airlines and was a cabin crew for them, and said that she was a psychic and did her own, after assisting Fuller with his book, wrote her own book called My Search for the Ghost of Flight 401. And there's basically two schools of thought on that haunting. So one is the official story taken by the airline, by Eastern, was that they did not move any of the parts from the crashed aircraft onto the rest of their fleet, which is kind of the linchpin of Fuller's story, right? For those who don't know,
Right.
Flight 401 went down in the Florida Everglades. Many of its complement were killed, including its pilots and flight engineer. And Eastern Airlines supposedly cannibalized the wreckage for parts which were put in other aircraft of the same type on their airline. And then the ghosts of the captain and the flight engineer were seen on these other flights, and apparently said there'll never be another tri-style crash for Eastern Airlines. We will not allow it to happen. And this story kind of made its rounds among aircrew, not just of Eastern Airlines, but other airlines too that worked with them. And it became almost like this sailor's ghost ship story of the skies. You know, I found that very interesting, the way these stories spread. The airline flat denied it, and the head of Eastern at that time was Frank Borman, who was an Apollo astronaut. I mean, this was a no-nonsense guy. And I like to give Frank Borman a big shout-out because we're pretty down on CEOs today. Frank Borman got on a helicopter in the middle of the night and flew out to the crash site in the Everglades to help with the rescue process. I mean, this was a different breed of guy, you know? Great man.
Yes.
He took great offense to the ghost stories and said that they were basically hogwash, that they had never moved these parts. And indeed, there is no documentary evidence to support the idea that they did move these parts to other aircraft. However, on the flip side, you have Eastern Airlines personnel who said they were threatened with job loss if they talked about it, and that the parts had been moved, and they were told specifically, do not chart this, do not document this in any logs or manifests or things like that. The people who saw the apparitions of the captain and the flight engineer, they knew them. They knew what they looked like. So it's unlikely that this was a case of mistaken identity. I mean, in one case, you know, they saw one of them looking at them out of the microwave oven, I think it was, in the galley. Were they hallucinating? Were they making it up? If so, why? Why risk your job? Why risk your career by inventing a ghost story like that to no benefit at yourself, you know? So I find it fascinating because there are these two schools of thought, and to this day, we don't know for sure how much truth there was or was not to the ghost stories.
Okay. Since you mentioned Tombstone, I was out there a few years ago. I got to do a little work inside one of the Undertaker's places. Went through was it the Crystal, I guess, the saloon there, but
Palace,
nothing happened. Crystal Palace, nothing much happened there that night. What did you find there?
I was fortunate enough to realize a boyhood dream, and I got to spend the night in the OK Corral doing research, which just that alone, leave the ghosts aside, I got to spend a night there and a night on Boot Hill. I mean, I don't think I've ever been happier, Dan, honestly. I'm a history aficionado. And I think most of us in the paranormal field, we're history buffs, right? We have a love for the history because a ghost is basically history given a form, a voice, and a personality. So it was interesting because the OK Corral, without a doubt, you know, what do they say? 30 bullets in 30 seconds, right? The most famous 30 seconds in all of Western history. And I was fully expecting to get something related to that gunfight, right? Because they recreate this over and over again. It's reenacted multiple times a day, every day of the year except Christmas. The Earps and Doc Holliday always win, except on April Fool's Day when the bad guys are allowed to win. I think that's fantastic.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, epic trolling. The Earps lose on the morning of April the 1st, which is super cool to me. Anyway, I did not get anything relating to the OK Corral gunfight, but what we got was in one of the cribs. Now, the cribs, that's a term for a bed in a small cabin used by a sex worker, one of the many prostitutes. Tombstone had thousands of ladies of negotiable affection back then. And a couple of my colleagues were investigating in there, and they asked, if you were here and if you could leave this place, where would you go? And a very mournful, this was an EVP, a very mournful male voice just said, I'd go home, which broke my heart hearing it. I'd go home.
Yeah.
It implied that some guy was stuck there, who knows how long after his death.
Wow. So this was not one of the prostitutes then. This was somebody just kind of stuck in there.
It's clearly a male voice. So as to who it was, I couldn't say, but it was right there in the OK Corral. And of course, the OK Corral was not really the scene of the shootout. If we're going to be accurate, they should have called it the gunfight in the empty lot, nearly at, but not quite in the OK Corral. But that didn't fit on movie posters. So this was like just slightly adjacent to it, but you're still within the OK Corral complex. You're within the walls. You're within the boundary, So I puzzled to the identity of that male voice to this day.
There's a large wall there, right?
Yeah.
Kind of in the middle of the old corral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't get to see the whole corral. Not like you said, the battle didn't occur there anyway, but.
But we're within that wall, so you actually can put your eyes right on the OK Corral. I could wave at somebody there. I could toss a coin at them or whatever, and hit them with it. So, yeah, we were right there, right near Fly's photography studio where Doc Holliday famously had his quarters and where during the gunfight, his girlfriend, Big Nose Kate, watched the whole thing go down. So I think Tombstone is fantastic. Boot Hill was another of those iconic locations where the most terrifying thing on Boot Hill, to my mind, is rattlesnakes.
I was thinking that same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and scorpions. So I made sure to invest in a good pair of cowboy boots. Not that I needed an excuse, but we spent the night out there. And what's interesting was we got some good activity by the Clanton grave. The Clantons being the opponents of the Earps and Doc Holliday. And I'm not beyond bribing the ghosts. So, we used some miniatures of whiskey that we brought for that purpose to offer them some drinks. And things were going great until my friend Greg joined us. Now, Greg, not just a great paranormal investigator and a wonderful human being, but also is a cop working out of Texas and an honorary Tombstone Marshal. And when we announced that fact to the Clantons, the stuff coming through our spirit box got very profane and very unhappy very quick.
Wow.
Yeah. Still not liking the law.
And I think Ike, or the old man, Clanton, did not die there. No, he was not involved in the shootout.
You're correct. And his grave is directly next to theirs. So it's right next door. But yeah, the three boys that were killed in the gunfight are buried, and it looks like a communal grave. It's really just a series of stones. And so, the three of them are together side by side. We also saw some pretty interesting shadow figure activity on Boot Hill as well. But just being out there under the stars was amazing. The only downside to it is that it's near a major road. It's actually on a major road. So much of our EVP evidence potentially was contaminated. It's a very noisy place. Right. Yeah. I
was there for an afternoon, but I didn't get to go back at night. So you got some great stuff there if you got to listen to them get profane over the police.
Yeah, and just a privilege to be there, I mean, they have signs up, which I thought was very interesting. The gift shop at Boot Hill is known for poltergeist activity, for things moving around in the middle of the night when it's all locked up. But they have signs that tell you about the curse of Boot Hill. Numerous people that have taken stones and keepsakes from the cemetery and have had bad things befall them and have had to return them. I thought that was interesting because I've seen that at several other haunted locations in my career.
Other than Boot Hill and Tombstone, you named off some other places you'd been looking into here. Did you get the chance to try Amityville? I think it's the most famous in this country.
It is, and no. Okay. So I've written about Amityville in the past, but I've written primarily about the murders. I feel strongly about Amityville, and I always preface this by saying I obviously wasn't there, and there are people like Chris Quarantino, formerly Christopher Lutz, that was there, and I've never met Chris, but I know people that hold him in high regard, and he insists that there was genuine paranormal activity, so we have to remember that. But when you look at the totality of the case, I keep coming back to the fact that, the attorney for Butch DeFeo, the murderer, came out and said that he and the Lutzes had cooked the ghost story up over a couple of bottles of wine one night. His aim was to basically get Butch DeFeo out of jail on an insanity plea. The Lutzes were in over their head on a mortgage with a house they couldn't afford, and it was an opportunity to make money. And as we saw, although they didn't make a ton of money, the publishers, author Jay Anson, and then eventually the movie studios made a fortune. There are 50-something Amityville movies out there right now, if you go look on Amazon, including Amityville in Space, for goodness sake.
Sorry, I missed that one.
Yeah, me too. I don't think I'll go looking for it too hard. But what bothers me most about that whole thing, Dan, is, there are some weird things. Why did nobody hear gunshots, during the night of the murders? Butch DeFeo wrote to a local reporter and said, very tellingly, he said, we both know there was only one demon at Amityville, and that was me. We forget, I think, that at the heart of that case is the murder of a bunch of innocent people who were all shot in their beds by one of their own. That's the tragedy. And all of this rests on the back of that tragedy, So I don't find the evidence for that haunting to be a compelling one. I really, really don't.
What is your opinion then of that photo of the blank-eyed boy that I believe, I can't remember who got it, but
I've seen the one that you mean, and some sources have said that it's a very real physical flesh and blood child in the house. And when you look at the case, certain things fall apart. Dr. Stephen Kaplan, who's long since dead, had written a book kind of dismissing it, calling it the Amityville horror hoax, I believe. The red eyes the glowing eyes were attributed to a neighbor's tomcat. There's the fact as well that no subsequent neighbor, so nobody that has owned that house since the Lutzes left has reported anything paranormal. Now, devil's advocate, because I don't want to be a killjoy, it's possible that the haunting was attached more to the Lutzes themselves than to the location. Maybe that's it. And maybe when they cleared out, the activity did not stay with the location, right? That's possible. But I really do find Amityville to be a questionable case. So,
did the family have they had a lot of problems. I know there was a divorce, there was money problems, health problems.
Yeah, they'll show me a family that doesn't, right?
But that kind of makes me think you might be right on that. This was something attached to them more than the house.
Yeah, maybe. And again, I respect the viewpoint of Mr. Quarantino. Never met the guy, but I don't know why he would, not be truthful about it. So you don't throw out evidence or testimony because it doesn't fit your own personal beliefs, right? So I'm not saying there wasn't a haunting. I'm not saying there wasn't paranormal activity. What I don't believe is what we saw in the movie and we read in Anson's book. I think they took a haunting and they ramped it up to Hollywood 10, which, this happens every day. I mean, we're talking the month there's a new Conjuring movie out, right? Every time there's one of those kind of movies, we see distortions in truth.
I don't know if you deal with it as investigators. Every time one of those silly movies come out, we get flooded with phone calls of people who say their house has a demon in it.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a whole book on this, In Search of Demons. And don't get me wrong, Dan, I love those movies. They're entertainment, though. And leaving aside the personal life of Ed and Lorraine Warren, which is a whole other subject, their own ghostwriters have come forward and said that, what went in the books about the Warrens' cases. One of them, very notably, I think it was Robert Curran, said, he was told by Ed, never mind the facts, just make it scary, make it up and make it scary. So I can enjoy those movies as entertainment, but you look at the bastardization of what they've done to history. And I think one of the biggest offenders is the second movie, based on the Enfield case. Guy Lyon Playfair and Maurice Gross, the two very skilled, seasoned investigators that worked that case for years, are painted as basically bit actors in the movie, and the Warrens are the stars. In reality, they were at Enfield for a morning, not even an entire day. And Guy Playfair said that Ed Warren took him aside and said, if we play this right, we could make a lot of money. Who knows what to believe? I know the Warrens have their advocates, but one thing we can say for sure is what makes it to the silver screen is that there's almost no resemblance to what actually happened.
Yeah. From the beginning, when they had Annabelle as a totally different kind of a doll, we knew there was a problem with that.
Well, and of course, Annabelle being the subject of its own controversy right now. I will say this, one of my friends is a detective. I work as a paramedic for a living, so I know quite a few police officers. And a detective said something very wise to me, and I apply this to all my cases, and I encourage any paranormal investigator to adopt this mindset. Ask yourself, who benefits from this being true? If there's a demonic infestation, if there is a possessed doll, if there is a house where the walls are bleeding, whatever you want to call it, who benefits and how? Because if money's being made or if money's changing hands, then you should question it. And I say that as someone who sells books, right? Question what I say, question my findings. I benefit financially when you read my books, although my favorite review of my first book, In Search of the Paranormal, was somebody who said, I love how much paranormal there isn't in this book. I wrote In Search of Demons, 80,000 words, and spoilers, I didn't find any. And boy, did I work hard to do it. I do think, though, that there are some interesting elements to that phenomenon that were worth discussing and bringing up. But who benefits, Dan, right? Who makes money?
Sure.
And another way that people benefit is in terms of their ego and self-image. So there is this notion that some people take an online course in demonology, which, by the way, who's accredited to deliver courses in demonology?
Since Malachi Martin passed, I can't think of anyone you would say would be capable of that.
Sure, but for 3 easy payments of $99.99, right? You can be a demonologist. I talked to a genuine parapsychologist, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe. He works out of the UK. He took, and this is a guy that actually is a PhD parapsychologist, one of the closest things to Peter Venkman that you can get, right? but with better morals, he would want me to add. He became an accredited demonologist. It cost him, I think it was $100. He had to read The Demonologist by Gerald Brittle. It is a book about the Warrens' career.
Sure.
And
I read it years ago.
He was given a multiple choice test, and when he completed it, printed a certificate that qualified him as a demonologist. And these people are out there. They are taking cases. They're scaring the pants off of people who are living in fear in their own home. And a lot of these folks are afraid because they've seen The Conjuring. They've seen The Exorcist. They maybe are of a Catholic background. And I have the greatest respect for people's religious beliefs. But if you do believe in demons, you're going to be frightened by demons.
Yeah.
But fortunately, there's a guy called Jeff who lives in, pick any town you want to name, not a Vatican qualified exorcist or anything like that. Jeff took an online course, and now he'll come in and he'll save you from the forces of darkness.
Yeah.
I know I'm soapboxing, man, and I'm sorry, but this is one of my...
No.
Yeah.
What always killed me when I was doing the lecture circuit was these guys who were 22-year-old demonologists, and they had long black coats with all their gear in there. And
folded arms, right? Got to do the folded arms.
Of course. This is not what a demonologist... It takes years to learn this stuff and experience in it with the priests and the exorcists. That was always a sore spot with me too.
It's a controversial subject, and I have friends that consider themselves to be demonologists. John Zaffis, I consider to be a friend. He and I see the world very differently, but we disagree respectfully when we disagree. And that's a wonderful thing, right? So I'm not saying there's no such thing as demons. I'm not saying that this isn't an avenue worthy of study. I am saying you should be very careful when somebody benefits from making you believe that you may be possessed or demonically attached.
Well, when you did these books, you said you didn't actually find any, but did you
Mhm.
come across cases that you believe are real?
I came across a number that made me question it. So I'll give you an
Okay.
example. I not only talked to demonologists, to priests, to bishops, but I also talked to psychologists, psychiatrists, medical
Mhm.
doctors. I wanted to cover this phenomenon from multiple angles. And I talked to a world-class illusionist and a skeptic, a guy called Aidan Sinclair. Now, I asked him, hey, if I gave you the financial resources, could you fake what we saw in the movie The Exorcist, right? You know, the levitation, the head spinning, all that stuff.
Sure.
Could you fake that to the point where an audience would believe it? A kind of David Blaine, Chris Angel, Penn and Teller thing. I thought that was a great, question to ask. And he said, I could probably fake it until you got within about 8 feet, and then you would know.
Okay.
And then, so that was interesting. But then he said, I'll tell you, one night I was actually asked to go attend an exorcism as a witness, and I couldn't explain what happened. So I said, well, tell me more. And so the church asked him to go to this exorcism in Wyoming, where this lady was nice as pie during the day and became supposedly demonically infested at night.
Okay.
So he went in to be a witness, and she went from being very pleasant to, again, after the sun went down, she was the classic cursing, swearing, spitting, blaspheming, thrashing monster that we see in every exorcism movie ever. It takes multiple grown men to hold her down. So being an illusionist, he has a St. Michael with him, and sleight of hand is their thing. So he
Mhm.
slips it into her pillowcase. When she comes forward thrashing, he's behind her back. She can't see him. There's no way she can see him. He slips the St. Michael under the pillowcase. She comes back to rest. Her back of her head comes into contact with this St. Michael, and she's up out of her chair like she has been burned on contact with it. And he said, I don't know how that happened. I cannot explain it to this day. She acted almost as if she had a contact burst.
Okay. Well, sounds like there might have been something there then, for sure.
Yeah,
All
and I
right.
think I don't believe in throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So just because I didn't find Beelzebub, and just because I, went to some of these supposedly demonically infested locations, just because I didn't experience that personally, doesn't mean it isn't a real phenomenon. I keep an open mind.
I believe it's a real phenomenon, but it is very, very rare.
I will say this, and I certainly believe it could be a real phenomenon, Dan. I totally agree it's very, very rare. I'll tell you what it for sure isn't. It isn't common enough that you can get 22 seasons of 8 episodes of any show out of it.
No, I'll agree with that. Richard, hold on. I'll be right back. I got to do a couple of commercials, and I'll be right back with you. Is this guy down to earth or what? Seriously, folks, this guy is. I like the way he talks. I like the way he thinks, and I agree with him on the demon stuff. I agree with him on a lot of it so far. So I like what I'm hearing. And if you might like what you're hearing, why don't you check this out real quick, and I'll be right back.
The new book, How to Research a Haunted House by paranormal investigator Margie Kay and professional researcher Violet Wisdom, is now available from Unex Media. This one-of-a-kind book explains how to do research on a house with uncommon methods and resources used by historic home researchers, and how to determine who may be doing the haunting and why. How to research a haunted house can be used by homeowners, renters, investors, and it should be in the library of all professional paranormal investigators. Get this unique book at unexmedia.com or amazon.com. That's unexmedia.com or amazon.com. The Unex Network presents a health and wellness spiritually based brand of hemp-derived CBD products made by Hopewell Farm in Harrogate, Tennessee. We apply our Cathara energy work with all of our plants and products. Our products made in small batches with only 2 ingredients of pure hemp, full spectrum crude oil, and coconut-derived MCT oil. Third-party lab tested for potency and legal THC levels with 6 strengths of 1 ounce oil to choose from. Know what you're buying and get what you pay for from Hopewell Farm. Applied directly to a specific area, Hopewell Farm topical salve in 1 ounce and ½ ounce sizes, made with pure hemp crude oil, comfrey extract, and all natural ingredients. Find the Hopewell Farm link and coupon code on the Unnext Network website at unnextnetwork.com. That's unnextnetwork.com.
All right, friends, I want to get right back to Richard, but I do want to just real briefly remind you, join up with the Unnext Network. Lots of stuff there. We got the blog, the magazine, and we'll talk more about that after the show. But I want to get back to Richard and specifically his newest book, Ghostly Encounters, Terrifyingly True Hauntings. What's one that people should not miss?
Oh, so many favorites. I talk about Gettysburg quite a bit because I think that's hallowed ground here in the United States. And I have a love of all things Civil War. I've been to many of the fields of that war. So walking at Fredericksburg, walking at Antietam along Bloody Lane. But none of those, and Chickamauga also, but none of those places compare to the feel of Gettysburg. And I think if you had me, if you nailed me down for this, I would have to say Gettysburg is probably the most haunted town in the United States.
That's quite a claim. A lot of towns claim that.
They do. And I think the deal with Gettysburg is that it feels almost as if history is closer to you in that town than anywhere else I've ever been. It's almost as if you could reach out and touch 1863. Have you ever been, Dan?
Not yet. Not yet.
So I encourage you to go. And I realize what I'm saying is, it's almost, sounds mystical, but just something about Gettysburg, you need no imagination at all to put yourself back there, July the 1st through the 4th in 1863, and imagine yourselves in the boots of those men, walking in their footsteps. And I think ghosts are such a part of the lore of Gettysburg that it's almost impossible to not be aware of that as you're walking around.
The man who owns the orphanage there has invited me to come down and check it out with him.
You must.
I'm gonna have to do that. Absolutely. What would it be the most haunted place you was there, or the place you had the most excitement?
It's impossible to say what's the most haunted there. I mean, the orphanage has quite the history, especially, it's known for the fact that Rosa Carmichael, who was governess of the orphanage there, was particularly abusive to the children. And it's got a lot of, tragic child abuse history. But I also do like to point out that this was for a relatively small amount of that building's history. It spent many, many decades as a museum with lots of positive energy in it too. Right across the street is the Jenny Wade House, Jenny Wade being the only civilian that was killed during the battle, and one of only 2 women, I think, in all of the US, where the Stars and Stripes flies over her grave 24/7 by decree. I think that's fantastic. Jenny Wade's house is extremely active, and it's been preserved as a living museum, and I highly recommend anybody going to Gettysburg visits that. My personal favorite, and I have to admit to being a bias because I wrote its haunted history, is the Farnsworth House, which is an inn just a little bit down Baltimore Street from the Jenny Wade House. It has 150 plus bullet holes in the wall, in the brick, from where the Union snipers on Cemetery Hill blasted at the side of that building. It was a Confederate sniper nest for much of the battle. And it's believed that the attic from the Farnsworth House is where the fatal shot that killed Jenny Wade was fired from. And the Farnsworth is by far the most active place I've investigated in that town. I always stay there when I go to Gettysburg as well.
What particular time of year? Is there a particular time, or is it that way all the time?
It's cyclical, in that the Battle of Gettysburg took place very appropriately over a 4th of July weekend in 1863, or I should say 4th of July period. We always think of it now as the long weekend, right? But what I've heard frequently from people that live and research in Gettysburg is as that date approaches, as we get past Christmas into the spring, we start to see the reenactors come out. The weather gets a little bit better. More people are on the field. You hear cannon fire, you hear muskets. Sometimes that's real. Sometimes it's an echo of those long golden days. And the closer the date of the battle is, the more frequent the activity gets around the town.
Okay.
And then, yeah, so it culminates right around the anniversary of the battle each year. And of course, anniversary hauntings are a thing, but this one kind of peaks then. I should do it this way. So it kind of peaks then, and then it troughs a little bit as you get into August, September, October, November, goes more fallow over the winter months, and then starts to ramp up in the run up to the next July. So I always recommend go to Gettysburg whenever you possibly can, if only to understand this pivotal moment of our national history. But the ghosts are everywhere, and they have something to teach us.
Where else did you manage to get for your book?
The one place that I didn't get to go that I wanted to was to France, because I wrote about the R101 airship. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that case.
I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it.
So if you go back to the late 1920s, Britain still had an empire then. Sorry about that, by the way. So the British government was looking for a way to easily reinforce distant outposts in the empire, to send troops quickly, to supply them. And now it's easy, right? We have like airborne brigades, and we have the ability to fly in these massive cargo planes, the Starlifters. Well, back then, the empire ran pretty much on sail and steam. So primarily steam in the late 20s. So they hit on the idea of a big national airship program. And so the idea was that they would build these massive airships, the biggest things in the skies, that would set off from England and be able to go directly to, say, Bombay in India or Sri Lanka or wherever, and drop off troops and dignitaries, things like that.
Okay.
So the first two airships, proof of concepts, the R100, the R101, sister ships, but different designs. The R101 was the biggest thing in the skies in 1930 when she flew. 777 feet long, massive, this behemoth. So the problem was that because this was a question of national prestige, the government, specifically the Air Ministry, pushed R101 through the safety process a little more quickly than they should have, and they cut corners. They ordered the officers to do this, and they ended up calling R101 the Titanic of the skies, which I think is why I find it so fascinating, right? On her maiden voyage to India, R101 is pushed through bad weather when she probably shouldn't have tried to make it through, in the same way that Titanic's captain, E.J. Smith, pushed through that ice field on his way to break that transatlantic record, Sailing through an ice field at night, even in a supposedly unsinkable ship, isn't the wisest move. But if you're trying to break a record, you give it a go, and look what happened. Well, the same happened with R101. She crosses the English Channel. She hits bad weather. It's pouring with rain, which soaks the canvas of the airship. Airship gets heavier, doesn't have enough lift. The nose goes down, and the elevator, which is supposed to help trim the airship and keep the nose up, jams. So she scrapes the rooftops in one of these small towns, then hits the ground on a lonely hillside. Okay. Now, it sounds like spectacular, but this isn't like a plane crash. Literally, she glides down like a balloon, scrapes the ground. But one of the struts of the metal frame breaks through the skin. Gas bags containing the hydrogen helium rupture. You have gas that's flowing out of this leak. It hits the super hot engines, and boom. R101 goes up like massive explosion. Looks like a bomb has gone off. Most of her crew are burned to death. And so it's a national tragedy. Now, this is bad enough, but back in England, there is a seance going on. So 36 hours later, Harry Price, the famous ghost hunter, we mentioned Borley Rectory earlier. Harry Price is doing a seance with a medium named Mrs. Eileen Garrett. And they are trying to contact the ghost of, how cool is this, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. As we know, Conan Doyle was a big spiritualist. He always said if it were possible to communicate after his death, he would make an effort to do so. So they're trying to reach him. He died like 3 months before. Conan Doyle doesn't come through, but who does come through is a man called Flight Lieutenant Irvin, who was the commanding officer of R101. And he's very, very upset. Now, the news has made it into the papers that R101 went down the day before and has been great loss of life, but the details are still a little bit sketchy. Well, Flight Lieutenant Irvin has a whole bunch of details to share through Mrs. Garrett, and he uses the kind of terminology that an aviation engineer might use, today a commercial airline pilot might use quite comfortably, but an uneducated woman from rural Ireland would have no idea. He starts talking about phrases like usable lift being too low. And he starts talking about elevators getting jammed and trimming the airship and stuff like that. Phrases which are not in the papers, details that are not yet in the papers. The bodies of the R101's dead crew, by the way, they're put into individual coffins, flag draped, full military honors. The French president sees them off. This is a big deal, full military honors. They come across the channel in 2 Royal Navy destroyers. They lay in state in London before there is a burial in a mass grave for them in a church. Well, before all of this has happened, answers are coming through this medium from Flight Lieutenant Irvin. And he's not happy because he says, and this is a quote, he feels like they were damned murderers. Like they should have pushed back against the Air Ministry and said, this is not safe. We haven't done the appropriate checks. We haven't done our shakedown cruise, they call it, where they work out all the bugs, all because we were trying to get VIPs to India on this big show and tell. Well, the head of the Air Ministry was a guy called Sir Sefton Brankner. He burned to death in the crash of the R101 as well. The crash happened at night, and most of her passengers were asleep in their beds when they died. So Brankner kind of comes through at a future seance as well. Irvin is not happy with him, as you would expect. So there's a bit of tension coming through, but they are reinforcing how this crash happened. They talk about details that were never in the papers. The town that R101 scraped on her way to the crash was called Aichi. It's a tiny town that's not on most maps of the time. But Mrs. Garrett knew it, and she talked about it. And it turned out when they checked, yep, R101 had almost scraped the rooftops in that town. So it's one of the few cases I can remember in which, you have the crew of a doomed vessel that came back afterwards via psychic mediumship to talk about how and why they died.
It would be difficult to say that's not true because she would not have gotten this information. They didn't have TV and quick radio.
And even if they did, a lot of it is the language, you would have to, I mean, what did this lady invest in textbooks about aeronautical engineering and pick the right phrases that would apply to the right dirigible? You have to jump through a lot of hoops to buy that story. And the stuff that supposedly the spirit of Flight Lieutenant Irvin was saying checked out. I mean, people from the Air Ministry attended future seances and they said, this sounds legitimate to us.
Okay. Wow. And then you just couldn't get over to France, or?
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to do that, unfortunately. And if you go to the crash site, all there is, you would expect there to be a fairly big monument. There is a very small stone monument that just indicates the R101 crashed on this hillside. It's a forested hillside with a whole bunch of trees and a huge swathe of nothing in the middle where the airship came down. But there is an interesting coda to the story. So this national disaster of R101, if something gets called, well, the cavalry's coming.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. If something gets called the Titanic of anything, that's never going to be a good thing, right?
Right.
So when the British press started calling R101 the Titanic of the skies, it killed the airship program. Like Britain just said, we're gonna rethink this. We are not investing in airships. So they broke down R101. What was left was the metal frame. They broke that down for scrap. They broke down its sister ship R100 for scrap as well. They sold it to the Zeppelin company in Germany. And where did some of that scrap go? Into the Hindenburg.
I was going to say a spot in New Jersey, I'm sure is where it ended.
Yep. So the Hindenburg actually contained metal from R101.
Well, now, that just brings us around to the 301 and the legends of that.
And that killed the German airship program. So we still do use airships today, but the golden age of airships never really happened because of R101 and because of Hindenburg. So there's a certain tragedy to this story, but also a poignancy to it. And it has a lot to say about arrogance and hubris as well. And the fact that the spirits would not be quiet. We all talk about the rationale for a haunting often being unfinished business, right? In the case of R101, the unfinished business was telling the story of who was to blame and why all those men died. And R101 and R100 were hangared in these massive buildings, structures that were so big, they actually would have clouds form at the roof. They did not get demolished. The structures are there today in Cardington, England. Those buildings, you can't just wander into them or anything, but they are said to be haunted. Phantom footsteps, voices, screams, you know, the usual stuff. And they're attributed to the ghosts of R101. Chances are, though, you've actually seen them, Dan. I'm guessing you like movies. Did you ever see the Christopher Nolan Batman movies?
Yes, of course.
They shot them in those buildings. They're used as film studios now. Disney shoots Star Wars movies in there because they are so big. They doubled for Bane's Lair in the third Batman movie, for example. So there's this weird afterlife to the R101 hangars where Cardington sheds still are reputed to be haunted by those ghosts. And we see them in movies all the time. We just don't know it.
That's incredible. What other places there that you haven't hit yet that you're wanting to go to?
Oh, so many, right? So many. I get to do a few of them later this year on my bucket list. So I have Virginia City out west. I'm a big Wild West aficionado, as I said. So I'm getting to Virginia City. The old Washoe Club is one. I'd love to do Alcatraz. I've never gotten there. Alcatraz just fascinates me. Its history, its geography. My absolute number one location still would have to be the White House. I'm a huge Abraham Lincoln fanatic. I read everything I can about Lincoln, and I would love to spend a night in the White House, just see if Honest Abe is still around.
Well, they report that he is, but it's hard to. I've not seen it myself, of course.
No, according to the to those in the know, they say that Abe's ghost is most active in times of national turmoil. So he was very active throughout FDR's administration, Second World War, go figure. Truman had his own encounters with him as well. I know that most presidents have stories either he's seen, heard, or felt, you know. And the stories that most interest me are like he's always reported in the Lincoln bedroom, but that was never his bedroom. That was the Lincoln bedroom was his office. So that's where he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. That room has a whole bunch of history to it. It's also where Lincoln met visitors. But the bed has only been in the bedroom since 1945. It was the bed that Mary Todd Lincoln bought to for visitors to sleep in. But when Honest Abe is seen on that bed, pulling on his boots, he never slept in that room.
Didn't Churchill run into Lincoln's ghost there?
Yes and no. It's one of the most famous stories, and I believed it as well until I started doing research. So the story goes that Churchill is in his bathtub, right? He gets up, of course, cigar, glass of brandy or something alcoholic, as Churchill was keen to do, dries off, wanders into the Lincoln bedroom, and there is the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. Churchill looks at him, Abe looks at Churchill. Churchill says, "Mr. President, you have me at a disadvantage, sir." And then Lincoln smiles and disappears. Unfortunately, actual historians have looked into this. When Churchill stayed at the White House in 1941, he would not stay in the Lincoln bedroom.
Okay.
In that particular, and the reason is very, very simple. He did not like the bed. It wasn't comfy. So he actually stayed in the room. I think it was the Rose Room, which was across the hall, which means if the encounter happened, it did not happen in that bedroom, as we've been told so often. Churchill was the raconteur, though. He loved a good story. And he never let the truth get in the way of a good story, right? So it sounds like it should have happened, but the evidence suggests it didn't. A more compelling story was Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, again, during the 1940s. stayed there. She supposedly was in the Lincoln bedroom. There was a knock at the door. She opened the door, and there is Abe standing in the door, top hat, frock coat, all that, as we think of him. And he looked at her, she looked at him, and she fainted dead away.
That makes more sense.
It really does.
You know, we're running a little bit low on time, but I do want to just bring up a couple of things here. Some of your books, which I can't wait to read more of them. The Mothman book with David Weatherly as forward. That's pretty cool.
Dave's a great guy.
Dark Spirits, you've got, you've talked a little bit about some of the demons, and we chatted a little bit about that. The monsters, what kind of monsters? Are you talking Bigfoot, or are you talking something different?
Yeah, that book is not out until March, so that's a pre-order right now from Visible Ink. But that was my chance to basically go and talk about cryptids. So there are some of the obvious ones, you know, the Loch Ness Monster, and you have to talk about Bigfoot and Sasquatch. I don't mean that in a bad way, but there's an expectation. But I also wanted to look at like mysterious flying creatures. I wanted to look at India's vampires, who are naked women that ride tigers through the night. I mean, how can you not want to know more about that?
Absolutely.
Right? So I tried to strike this balance between the monsters we know and love, the ones that may not get enough love out there, like, say, the Flatwoods Monster and things like that.
All right. And then In Search of Demons, we talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And Haunted Healthcare. Now, that one just really seems intriguing to me. I've talked to nurses who had their own stories, so I'm assuming that's where you got a lot of them.
Yeah, I became an EMT in 2001, paramedic in 2009, and for the longest time, nurses, doctors, they would have these weird experiences, and they would say, "Oh, well, that strange paramedic will be by later on. You should tell him. He believes in all this stuff." And I collected enough of those stories. I put them into a book, actually a couple of books, and I felt like they needed preserving. So many nurses have ghost stories. In fact, when I did the show Haunted Hospitals for 5 seasons, our tagline on that show was "Every nurse has a ghost story." And almost every nurse I've ever talked to has something work related to talk about.
I find the ones that worked in the nursing homes really had a lot of stories with that.
Well,
more death.
And I'll tell you, I mean, no matter what your religious beliefs might be, if there is anything close to an angel in humanity, it is those people that work in end-of-life care. It is such a difficult, emotionally searing, and important job. And so many of them have stories. The staff that looked after my mom when she was dying of cancer in hospice told me after she passed that right before she died, she was having conversations with long lost family members, lucid conversations. My mom had brain cancer, metastasized from her lungs to her brain. So she was semi-comatose towards the end of it, but she would have these lucid spells where she was having conversations with dead people. And they didn't bat an eyelid. They said, "This happens all the time. We see this more often than not." And when those conversations start happening, it usually means that the person is getting ready to pass.
Yeah. And I've heard the same stories from people, so it's amazing. And again, Ghostly Encounters, it came out last week. Where can they pick that up at?
All good bookstores. You can, of course, get it from the usual online retailers. But I'm a big fan if you want to contact your local independently owned mom and pop bookstore, see if they'll order it in for you, because they can. And let's support them and give bookstores more of our money.
Well said. I like that. Richard, thanks for coming on. It's been an honor to hear from you, and I look forward to hopefully getting you back in here for some stories on the cryptids, the monsters, the demons.
Yeah, Monsters will be out next spring. We should definitely do a repeat visit. Talk to Visible Ink, and we'll make that happen.
I'll take care of that. Thank you. And you have a good night. Thanks again for being on.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care. That was an honor. I'm serious, guys. The way he speaks, he's so flat out. He's blunt. This is the way it is. This is the way he sees it, and that's very refreshing, and especially when that's not exactly true. So I really respect that too. And I know I've got to go quick. I do want to remind you, the UNX Network, go to unxnetwork.com, drop down on the main screen, join up. There's a lot of things you get out of it. You get the blog, The blog has been burning up lately with the Tic Tacs, the UFOs, more witnesses coming out. We've got now a new UFO thing with that video. I don't know if you saw it, of the Hellfire missile bouncing off of one. Not sure about that one yet, but it has been making the rounds. And there's some other stuff going on we need to talk about, and this is the place to go, into the blog. You also get the newsletter, which describes more of what's going on with Onyx Network as well, and the magazine, which comes to you every couple of months by email. They're really got some of the best writers. Unfortunately, we don't have Richard on this one, but we got some really good writers coming in. This one I actually had a story on haunted dolls, which, guys, haunted dolls creep me out anyway, you know. And this one here had one I did about the last call at the Devil's Diner. This is just May of this year. Back in March, the restaurant, it was called the Diamonds, or the old Tri-County Truck Stop. It was on Route 66 in Missouri. Tornado hit it, and it's all but destroyed. But at one time, I got to ghost hunt that place a lot. It was insanely haunted, got a lot of neat evidence there, and I'm sorry to see it go. It was quite the place. So, but the magazines are there. Come on and check it out. And hey, it's Halloween, guys. Halloween season is right here, just what we like. So get out there, enjoy it. I mean, you got ghost tours. My friends in Stokes County, we recently talked about their ghost tours, including the one where 28 days or 28 something like that days was shot about the hauntings in this general store. And their place, Danbury, we got St. Louis has a couple different ones, including my good friend Dr. Mark Farley with St. Louis Paranormal Research Society, the Lemp Mansion, the Lemp Brewery, great tours, Lemp Neighborhood. A lot of good stories there, and almost every town. I work here in Mount Airy, North Carolina, the town based on Mayberry. I do a ghost tour there. Do a ghost tour in Pilot Mountain, which was the town they based Mount Pilot on in the old Andy Griffin show. So there's a lot of tours in little towns. It's worth checking out. And usually, like in my case, it's a charity thing. It's ours is for the Regional History Museum. So check those things out and enjoy the holiday season. It only comes once a year. And the most important thing while you're enjoying it is you've got to stay spooked. Good night. All right, let me try that again. Good night.